The child had been screaming for 4 hours when Verity Ashwell finally put down her candle, pressed her ear to the nursery door, and heard the sound of a man at the end of his resources. She did not know, in that moment, that the door would change everything. Had she known, she would have raised her knuckle to the wood all the same, not from courage, though she had enough of that, but because the screaming was unbearable, and because she knew, in the particular way she knew most useful things, exactly what to do about it. The date that mattered was the 14th of August. 12 days. That was how long remained before Lord Cavendish Thorpe, 6th Duke of Ashenmere, was required by the terms of his late wife's estate to present his daughter before the trustees in London, a living, demonstrably healthy infant, or forfeit the child's inheritance entire. 12 days in which the infant in question, one Lady Elspeth Cavendish Thorpe, aged 3 months and 4 days, had so far declined to demonstrate her health by doing anything other than refusing to eat and screaming without interruption, as though she had read the terms herself and found them insulting. Verity had been at Ashenmere Hall for 11 days. She had come as companion to Mrs. Patience Gillow, the Duke's maternal aunt, who had arrived to assist, and had managed so far to assist chiefly by retiring early with a headache. Verity's position in the household was the kind that furnished a person with excellent information and no particular obligation to do anything about it. She had learned in 11 days the following things: that the nursery staff consisted of a wet nurse who wept and a nursemaid who prayed, and that neither technique was producing results, that the Duke had not slept in 4 days, that his secretary, Mr. Aldous Pell, was a man whose voice was always softer than the occasion seemed to require, and that the cook's cat had more authority in the kitchen than the cook. She had not intended to interfere. She had been very clear with herself about not interfering. She had a gift for recognizing when she was not wanted, and she had spent 23 years making herself small enough to fit inside that recognition without bruising. Then the screaming reached a register she associated with genuine distress rather than ordinary infant displeasure, and she stopped being careful and knocked. The Duke opened the door himself. She had not expected that. She had expected a footman, possibly the nursemaid, certainly someone whose salary included managing intrusions at 11 in the evening. Instead, she found 6 feet and some inches of a man who had removed his coat and cravat, whose shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and whose face wore the particular expression of a person who has tried everything they know and run clean out of knowledge. He was holding the infant against his chest with the careful rigidity of someone who had not held many infants and was compensating for uncertainty with structure. His eyes went to Verity and stayed there with a flatness that was not rudeness. It was something else. The look of a man taking inventory of whether there was any use in this new variable. "Miss Ashwell," he said. He knew her name. She had not realized he knew her name. "Your Grace." She kept her hands folded. "I believe I know what is wrong with her." The Duke looked down at the child, who was generating a sound that seemed structurally improbable for a creature of that size. He looked back at Verity. "Then, by all means," he said, and stepped aside. She had grown up on a sheep farm in Westmoreland, the plainer elder daughter of a man who kept meticulous records and died before he could be repaid for them. Among the things her father's farm had taught her was that young animals in distress often have simple mechanical problems that look, to observers in panic, like catastrophes of nature. She had learned the difference between a lamb that was dying and a lamb that was merely cold and needed a specific kind of warmth applied in a specific place. It was not a skill that generally came up in the drawing rooms of great houses, which was one reason she had never mentioned it. She took the infant from the Duke's arms. He yielded her with a precision that spoke of a man who had been terrified of dropping her, and turned her carefully onto her side, supporting her head, and applied 2 fingers to the small of her back in a particular rhythm that was less a pat and more a conversation. Then she walked, not around the room, but in a specific tight circle, the same interval, maintaining the same depth of pressure, and she sang under her breath a Westmoreland counting song that had no particular beauty but had exactly the right meter. Elspeth Cavendish Thorpe considered this development. Then, with the air of someone making a concession they found largely unreasonable, she stopped screaming. The silence was enormous. Verity kept walking and singing. She did not look at the Duke. She could feel him at the edge of the room, the way you feel a fire you are standing near, not because you are looking at it, but because your skin knows where the warmth is coming from. She had a professional composure about this kind of awareness. She filed it and did not examine it. After some minutes, Elspeth made a small complaint, nursed adequately for the first time in 2 days, and fell into an abrupt and absolute sleep. Verity laid her down with the care she would have used for something irreplaceable. The child did not wake. She was cold, Verity said quietly. Not the room, her feet. The blanket had worked loose. She could not tell you what was wrong, so she said everything was wrong, as loudly as possible. Infants are not subtle. She straightened. She will need the blanket secured at the corners. I can show the nursemaid in the morning. She turned around. The Duke of Ashenmary was watching her with an expression she could not immediately categorize. His hands were at his sides, very still, and there was something in the quality of that stillness that suggested it was chosen rather than natural, the stillness of a man taking a blow without letting his face report it. He looked, she thought, like a person who has just been informed that the problem was small and would have to decide whether to be relieved or embarrassed, and was deferring the decision. "Where," he said, "did you learn that?" "Sheep," she said. A silence that was not uncomfortable. "Then, I see. I do not mean to suggest any resemblance," she added, because she was constitutionally unable to leave a clean sentence alone when it had a ragged edge. He looked at her for one more moment with that unreadable inventory expression. "No," he said finally, "I didn't take it that way." He picked up the blanket from the floor and held it a moment as though he had forgotten what to do with his hands, which she suspected was not a position he occupied often. "Thank you, Miss Ashwell." "Good night, Your Grace." She was at the door when he said, quietly, "I don't know what it is you have done, but I am aware it is the most useful thing anyone in this house has managed in 11 days. She kept her face forward. "Then the house has been approaching the problem incorrectly," she said, and left before the warmth in her chest could become anything she would have to account for. Mrs. Patience Gillow was, at one level, a delightful woman. At another level, she was a woman who had opinions about everything, shared them without ration, and had spent 50 years being so relentlessly pleasant about it that no one had ever successfully objected. She occupied a chaise in the blue sitting room every morning, with a cup of tea and a view of the lane, and she issued observations on passing life with the serenity of a person who considers observation to be a form of public service. "Cavendish is very like his father," she said the morning after the nursery, without preamble, as Verity sat nearby making neat columns in a small notebook. She kept records of things that might be useful later, a habit she had inherited along with everything else from her father. The same way of carrying himself as though the room has been arranged around him. Not arrogance, mind you, more like he has simply never been in a room that hasn't. Said Verity, which she had found was the correct unit of response to Mrs. Gillow's observations. "He has not smiled since Eleanor died." Mrs. Gillo set down her cup with a small, decisive click. I do not think he blames himself, exactly, but grief and duty have gotten confused in him somewhere, and they are coming out as thoroughness. He is thorough about everything. It is exhausting to witness. She looked at Verity. You were in the nursery last evening. It was not a question. Mrs. Gillo knew where everything was at all times. Yes, Verity said. And the child slept. Yes, and Cavendish let a stranger in at 11 in the evening. Mrs. Gillo considered this. He must have been quite desperate. He was, Verity said, which she realized too late was a more candid answer than she had intended to give. Mrs. Gillo smiled the smile of a woman who was filing something away. He is a very private man, she said, in a tone that was precisely, carefully, and entirely conversationally. He does not extend trust easily. When he does, it is generally absolute. She picked up her cup again. I merely observe. I know, said Verity. You always merely observe. And yet, said Mrs. Gillo serenely, things have a way of occurring. The morning was bright, and the lane was empty, and Verity returned to her columns and told herself firmly that she was a companion in a great house for 3 more weeks, and then she would return to wherever Mrs. Gillo went next, and this was a perfectly clear and manageable situation that required no further observation of any kind. Aldous Pell came to find her an hour later. He was the Duke's secretary, and he had the kind of beauty that announced itself before the rest of him arrived, fair-haired, elegant, with a manner that was all attentive warmth, all soft voice, all considered courtesy. The kind of manner, Verity thought, that cost its owner nothing and was therefore offered everywhere. He smiled at her from the doorway with an expression of genuine seeming delight. Miss Ashwell, you are the person who silenced the miracle. He stepped into the room and leaned very slightly against the doorframe in the way of a man who has learned that partial entries are more charming than complete ones. The whole house is talking of it. Cook's cat is apparently the only resident unmoved. The cat has good sense, Verity said. I have been sent to relay His Grace's request, Pell said, that you might be willing to look in on Lady Elspeth this morning to advise the nursemaid on your method. He would not ask it as an obligation. He would ask it as a favor. She noticed that he said he would not, and he would ask with the ease of a man who had composed the message himself rather than transcribed it. She noticed the difference between he said to tell you and this. She filed it. Of course, she said. Excellent, the smile again. You know, it is rather extraordinary. He is not a man who accepts assistance gracefully. It is perhaps the only ungraceful thing about him. He paused, with the precision of a pause that wants to be heard as casual. You must have made quite an impression. She looked at him. Lady Elspeth made the impression. I only stopped the noise. Pell laughed. It was a generous laugh, the laugh of a man who wants you to know he appreciates you, and inclined his head and went away. And Verity sat for a moment looking at the space where he had been, and trying to identify the source of the faint discomfort she felt, the way you try to identify the smell of something that has recently been burned in a room that looks clean. She could not place it. She let it go. The nursemaid was a girl named Agnes, 17 and frightened of most things, with raw red hands from wringing them. Verity spent an hour with her and Lady Elspeth, demonstrating the circle and the counter and the song, and the keeping of the blanket firmly anchored, and Agnes absorbed it with the desperate gratitude of someone who has been handed a lamp in a very dark room. By the end of it, Agnes had done it twice herself, and Elspeth had remained, with some grumbling, largely composed. The Duke came to the nursery door at the end of the hour. He did not come in. He stood in the frame and watched from across the room as Agnes made her cautious circle, and his expression was the one she had seen briefly the night before. the one she still could not name. And she realized, with a particular observational clarity that was simultaneously her greatest asset and her most inconvenient quality, that whatever it was in his face was not about Agnes at all. She handed Agnes the corner pin for the blanket and excused herself and went out past him into the hall, and he fell into step beside her without being invited, which surprised her because he did not seem like a man who joined things without being invited. "She is better," he said. "She is much better. Agnes will manage now." Verity kept her pace even. She only needed to be shown the pattern. She is not unintelligent, she was panicking, and panic makes people forget that problems usually have solutions. A beat. "I was panicking," he said. "Yes," she said. "You were." She expected silence. She did not expect what came next. "I was also forgetting," he said, "that problems usually have solutions." She looked at him then. Just briefly, the fraction of a look she could justify as ordinary social courtesy. His face in full light was older than she had thought at 11 in the evening. There were lines at the edges of his eyes that were not from laughing. He was watching the corridor ahead of them with the expression of a man who is saying something he did not plan to say and is proceeding on the logic that having begun, he might as well complete it. "The 14th is 12 days away," she said. He stopped walking. She took 2 more steps before she stopped as well, and turned. He was looking at her with a new quality in the inventory expression, something sharp, something that was not quite surprise and was not quite suspicion, and was in the narrow border between them where interest lives. "Who told you?" he said. "No one. The trustees' letters have been sitting on the hall table for 3 days because no one has had a hand free to move them. The return address is a firm in Lincoln's Inn. The date stamped on the most recent one is the 8th of August. She paused. I read what is in front of me. I cannot always help it. He was very still. "Then, what else have you read?" She considered. "That you have not eaten a proper meal in 4 days, because the kitchen cannot be certain when you will appear, and the timing of the dishes has given up. That Mr. Pell has been handling the trustees' correspondence himself, which is either because you have asked him to, or because you have not had time to read it. That the nursemaid and the wet nurse have not been paid this month, and are trying not to mention it in present company." She paused. "That is the sum of what I have read. The rest is your private concern." He said nothing for a long moment. The corridor was very quiet. Somewhere below, the cook was operating at volume, and from the lane outside, the sound of a cart. "The letters," he said. "Has Pell, I couldn't say," she said honestly. "I don't know what is in them." Another silence. She watched him decide something, could see the decision move through him the way weather moves through a landscape, altering the surface before you can name what has changed. "Miss Ashwell," he said, "there is something I cannot yet lay before you. I want you to know that I am aware of that, and that I am not." He stopped. The door at the end of the hall opened, and a footman appeared with the mechanical purposefulness of footmen everywhere, and the moment closed like a wound. "Your Grace." "The footman, Mr. Pell asks whether you have a moment for the estate correspondence." The Duke looked at Verity for 1 beat more, with the expression of a man memorizing something he is not certain he will have occasion to look at again. Then he said, quietly, "Good night, Miss Ashwell," which was strange, she would think later, because it was 20 past 10 in the morning, and she would remember the error for a long time. The days had a pattern after that, and Verity mapped it with the same precision she gave to everything. In the mornings, she attended Lady Elspeth at the nursery, and the child, who had apparently decided that the world was marginally less hostile than previously assessed, cooperated in small increments. In the afternoons, she sat with Mrs. Gillow, who observed at length. In the evenings, she kept to the library, which was the one room in Ashenmere Hall that felt as though it had been built for someone who wanted to be quiet. On the third evening, the Duke was already in the library. He did not look up when she entered. He was reading a letter by the fire, and his working hands, she had noticed the working hands that first evening, had noticed that they were the hands of a man who fixed things rather than commissioning the fixing, were holding the paper with a tightness that told her something in it was unpleasant. She turned to leave. "Please don't," he said, still not looking up. She came in. She found a chair at the far end of the room and took up the book she had been working through, and they read in the same silence for the better part of an hour, and it was, she thought, the most comfortable she had been in 11 days. He spoke first. "Did you go to school?" "My father taught me," she said. "He had a classical education and a sheep farm and very few people worth talking to. And I was convenient." "What did he teach you?" "Latin, accounts, the difference between what a thing costs and what a thing is worth. How to read a face." She paused. He considered that last one the most important. He set down the letter. He did not put it on the table. He folded it and held it, as though releasing it would require a decision he had not made. "And what does my face tell you?" She looked at him across the length of the library, and she considered giving him a careful answer, the kind she had perfected over years of being a woman in rooms where her conclusions were not wanted. "That you are carrying something you were not built to carry alone," she said, "and that you have been doing it for long enough that you have forgotten it is unusual." He looked at the fire. The light moved on the planes of his face, and she watched it in the way she watched things she was not supposed to want to watch, steadily and without visible signal. His jaw had a tension in it she had catalogued from the first evening. She had identified it, after some thought, as the tension of a man who has made a decision on behalf of someone else and is not yet certain the decision will hold. "My wife," he said, and stopped. She waited. "Eleanor was my father's choice," he said. "I do not say that as. I am not saying what people usually say when they say it. She was a good woman, and she deserved better than she got from this house and from me, and she knew it, and she was kind about knowing it, which was the most difficult thing of all." He looked at his hands. "She died in March. Elspeth was born the same day. The trustees required me to appear in August. The three facts arranged themselves into a kind of trap, and I have been in it for 5 months." She set down her book. "Tell me about the trap," she said. He glanced up sharply, not at the presumption of it, she thought, but at the directness, as though people did not generally ask to be told things plainly. "Eleanor's fortune is held in trust for Elspeth," he said. "The trustees must certify the child's health and survival at 6 months and again at 1 year. Without the first certification, the trust cannot be settled, and there are debts this estate cannot cover without it." He paused. "The debts are not profligate ones. They are the inheritance I received, my father's arithmetic, not mine. I have been correcting them for 6 years. "I see," she said. "And this is what Mr. Pell has been handling." Something changed in his face. It was subtle, no more than a fractional rearrangement of the lines around his eyes, but she saw it. "Pell has been corresponding with the trustees on my behalf," he said. "I have been occupied." "Yes," she said. She heard something in his voice she could not yet locate, and she filed it next to the discomfort she felt after Pell's visit, and she let them sit together without drawing the conclusion they were inviting. He was watching her. "You have a way," he said slowly, "of listening that makes a person want to say things they had not planned to say." "My father had it too," she said. "He said it was because he never told people what to think after they had said something, and the absence created a space that things rushed in to fill. And what are you thinking now? She looked at the fire. That you said there was something you could not yet lay before me, she said, and I think it is connected to this. He was quiet for a long time. Outside, rain had begun. She had smelled it coming for an hour, that particular late summer smell of dust releasing, and it came against the library windows with a sound like letters delivered urgently. I will tell you, he said, when I can. I want you to know that I intend to. She looked back at him. He was watching her with the clear deliberateness of a man making a promise he intends to keep and is naming the intention aloud as a form of binding. I will hold you to it, she said, and he made a sound then. Very brief, very low, barely a sound at all, that she recognized, with some precision, as the beginning of a laugh arrested before it arrived. She noted it. She did not mark it as the milestone it was. She would mark it later, when she understood what she was counting. She went to bed thinking about the letter he had not put down. She woke the next morning to the discovery that the trustees had written again and that the letter had not reached the Duke. She knew this because Agnes told her in the way that information traveled through a great house, through the footman who carried the post to the hall table, to the upstairs maid who cleared it, to Agnes, who told everyone everything as a form of nervous release. The letter had arrived the evening before. It was not on the hall table. Agnes had seen Mr. Pell take it from the salver and go directly to his office. Verity went to breakfast and said nothing. She sat next to Mrs. Gillow and listened to observations about the weather, and she thought about the specific texture of Aldous Pell's voice when he had said he had been sent to relay the Duke's request, and she thought about the space between he would not ask it as an obligation and he said, please convey that it would be appreciated. And she thought about how a man with a soft voice and a generous laugh is never more effective than when the people around him have their hands too full to read what his face is doing when he thinks no one is watching. She thought about the Duke saying, I have been occupied. She thought about a trusted intimate with access to the correspondence. She thought about 12 days. She finished her breakfast and went to find the household accounts. She did this because she had a professional grade facility with accounts that was part of the texture of her life in great houses. Companions were often asked to keep household records when the housekeeper was overburdened, and Verity was useful in this way as in others, and because no one would think it strange. She asked the housekeeper, Mrs. Darvell, a capable and largely unflappable woman who smelled of lavender and spoke in complete paragraphs, whether the accounts needed looking over in the run up to August, when the house would presumably be preparing the London journey, and Mrs. Darvell said she would be grateful and handed her 3 ledgers without ceremony. Verity sat in the housekeeper's room and went through the ledgers and found nothing wrong. The household accounts were impeccable. She was not surprised. The problem she was looking for would not be here. What she found instead was a pattern in the dates. Certain correspondence, bills from London tradesmen, letters from the trustees' predecessors, a note from a solicitor she did not recognize, had been received and logged in the entry book and then not logged again in the response book. The entries existed. The responses did not. In a house where everything was logged, the absences were the information. She went back to her chair by Mrs. Gillow and thought about what a trusted intimate with access to a daily channel, correspondence, medication, a ledger, a document, might do with that access. She thought about the specific geometry of a trap, that it requires not active violence, but the careful editing of what a person is permitted to know. The Duke, she thought, did not know what the trustees had written in that most recent letter. She suspected he did not know what they had written in several of the previous ones. She suspected there was a version of his situation that had been constructed for him from selected materials, and that it bore some resemblance to his actual situation and a greater resemblance to what someone needed him to believe. She did not yet know what the someone needed him to believe, or why. That evening she went to the library, and the Duke was there, and she sat down and said, without preface, "When did Mr. Pell come to you?" He looked up from his book. His face arranged itself into the inventory expression and then passed it into something more alert. "He has been my secretary for 4 years," he said. "I know that." "When did he come to you, after your wife died, and propose to take on the trustee's correspondence?" A silence that had a different quality from other silences. "Within a week," he said. "He said the correspondence was heavy and I should be spared the detail while I was. He said while the house was in mourning." She kept her hands folded. "I need you to tell me," she said, "who benefits, apart from Elspeth, if the certification in August is not completed." He put his book down. He was looking at her with the full weight of his attention, which was, she discovered, a substantial thing to be under. "My brother," he said. "My younger brother Geoffrey, who has a mortgage on his Norfolk property that requires £50,000 he does not have. Eleanor's trust, if it reverts, would cover it. And Geoffrey has been in London since March." He stopped. "Pell," he said, and it was not a question, "has been in correspondence with Geoffrey." "I don't know that yet," she said carefully. "I know that several letters from the trustees are unaccounted for in the response records. I know that the letter that arrived yesterday evening is not on the hall table. I know that Mr. Pell has a soft voice and a good manner, and he is the person who told you I had silenced the infant rather than letting you discover it yourself. And I thought at the time there was something imprecise in how he delivered the message." She paused. "I could be entirely wrong. He was quiet for a very long time. The rain had cleared, and the evening had come in clean and cool, and the fire was the only warm thing in the library, and she thought, absurdly, about the cold feet of a small infant who could not tell anyone what was wrong. "I am not going to tell you," he said at last, "that I should have seen this." "No," she said. "I trusted him absolutely. Yes, he managed my correspondence for 4 years without error. He managed it," she said, "impeccably, until the day when the specific arithmetic of the situation made managing it worth something to someone else." She looked at her hands. "This is not a question of his character having changed. It is a question of a number large enough to change the calculation." He stood up. He moved to the fire and stood with his back to her, and she looked at the line of his shoulders and the set of his neck, and she thought about the phrase "grief and duty have gotten confused in him," and she thought it was the most precise thing Mrs. Gillow had ever said. "What do I need?" he said to the fire. "The letter that arrived last evening," she said, "and the previous letters, if they exist, and the record of what Pell has written in your name." She paused. "You will also need someone to witness." He turned around. "To witness?" "The way out," she said, "is not through him privately. It is through the middle, in the light, with people who can swear to what they saw." He looked at her. He said, with the specificity of a man selecting each word, "You knew about the 14th before I told you. Yes, you have been thinking about this since before we had this conversation." "I had a piece of it," she said honestly. "I did not have the piece you gave me this evening." "My brother," he said, and his voice was very flat and very quiet. £50,000. She said nothing. He did not need her to. "Pell's office," he said. "In the morning," she said. "With witnesses you choose." He nodded once. It was the nod of a man who has made a decision and will not examine it further until it is necessary. He came back to his chair and picked up his book, and she picked up hers, and they sat for another hour in the same silence, except that the quality of it had changed entirely. The way a room changes when a window is opened, the same room, the same furniture, more air. Just before she stood to go, he said, "Miss Ashwell." She looked up. "There is something I have not yet told you." He said it the way he had said it in the corridor, with the quality of a man keeping a promise he named in advance. About Eleanor, about what Pell would have known, what he would have used. He stopped. "When I can tell you plainly, I will." "I know," she said. She stood. "Good night, Your Grace." "Good night," he said, and this time it was the correct time of day for it. She lay awake for 2 hours thinking about what the remaining piece was, and about what a man like Aldous Pell, who had watched a great house for 4 years with a soft voice and a generous laugh, would know that could be made into a weapon, and about what shape of protection would require a man like the Duke to keep it silent even now. By 3 in the morning she thought she knew. She was not happy about knowing. She was ready. All the same. The morning came in with the particular sharp light of August that made everything look accountable. Verity rose early and went to see Elspeth, who was demonstrating her health with conviction, eating well, fixing Agnes with an expression of imperious inquiry, making sounds that were not screaming and were somehow more demanding for it. Verity secured the blanket and sang 2 verses of the counting song, and told the infant, quietly, that she needed to do something difficult this morning and would appreciate the child remaining composed in her absence. Elspeth appeared to consider this request. "That will have to serve," Verity said, and went downstairs. The Duke was in the breakfast room. He had slept. She could see it in his face, the slight release at the jaw, the steadier eyes, and he had eaten, which she noted with something that felt uncomfortably like proprietorial satisfaction, and which she firmly reclassified as general goodwill. He was reading the newspaper with the expression of a man reading something in order to have a thing in his hands, not because he was taking in the content. He looked up. "Mrs. Darvell will serve as one witness," he said. "I have asked Sir Edmund Cray, who is a magistrate and lives at the North Lodge, to come at 11. He owes me nothing, and I owe him nothing, which makes him suitable." He paused. "I have not told Pell that Sir Edmund is expected." "Good," she said. She sat down and poured tea. "The letter from yesterday. I went to his office last night," the Duke said. He was not there. The letter was on his desk, unopened, in a stack with 2 others that I now recognize as having been mentioned in his reports to me without having arrived through my hands. His voice was even and clear and very cold at the edges, the way a fresh morning is cold, not hostile, but exact. He reported the letters to me. He summarized their content. The content he reported does not match what I am now holding. She set down her cup. What was the discrepancy? "The trustees," he said, "have twice written to ask whether I wish to advance the date of certification. Elspeth's health was apparently of sufficient concern to them, based on information they had received, to suggest that an earlier date might be in the child's interest." He paused. "Pell told me the trustees were not available until the 14th. She felt the shape of it close like a vice. The information they had received, she said, about Elspeth's health, supplied by Pell, he said, who wrote to them in my name and told them the infant was declining." He stopped. He breathed out through his nose, very controlled. She was colicky. She was cold. She was screaming, not dying. He needed her to fail the certification, Verity said, or to fail to reach it. He needed time to run out, the Duke said, which it would have done if he stopped again. If no one had knocked on the nursery door, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. She thought about Elspeth's cold feet, about the nursemaid who wept and the wet nurse who prayed, about 11 evenings of a man at the end of his resources, about the specific form of a trap that does not require violence, only the patient management of information, the editing of what a person is allowed to know, the careful construction of a reality in which the outcome is inevitable before anyone realizes the game has been played. "There is something else," she said. It was not quite a question. He was quiet. He turned his cup in his hands, his working hands, steady, deliberate. "Eleanor did not love me," he said. "That is not the something else. That is context." He looked at the window. She loved someone else, a man she could not marry for reasons of family and finance. This was known to me before the marriage and was the subject of a private agreement between us that no one else was ever meant to know about. The agreement was put in writing, at her request, because she was sensible and wanted it clear. He paused. "The letter exists. Pell knows about it. I believe he intends to produce it as evidence that Elspeth's parentage is, that the inheritance may be contested on different grounds if the certification route fails." Verity was very still. "The letter would destroy her reputation," he said. "She is dead, and it would destroy her, and it would make Elspeth's claim contestable in ways that would take years to unpick. Geoffrey knows about the letter too, I think. I believe Pell told him." His voice was quiet and cold and exact. "I have been protecting Eleanor's name. That is why I could not, why I did not want to lay this before anyone." She thought about the shape of it. A grief-armored man, deciding alone who may be spent to protect whom, holding a secret that had been turned into a siege weapon, unable to move against the man who held it without exposing what he was protecting. "The letter," she said. "Where is it?" "In the house safe," he said. "Where I put it because I did not think," he stopped. "Where I put it because I trusted my secretary." She looked at him steadily. "Then we need it before 11, she said. "We need it before Sir Edmund arrives." He stood. She stood. He said, very quietly, "You understand what it contains." "I understand that it is private correspondence," she said, "between a man and his wife, and that its contents are not relevant to your daughter's health or her inheritance, and that any attempt to use it in evidence would say more about the person presenting it than about anyone it concerns." She paused. "I would like to be the one who reads it aloud, if it comes to that." "I have a clear voice." He looked at her for a moment with the expression she had still not named. It had a different quality now, not inventory, not assessment, something on the other side of those, where you arrive after you have finished counting and begun simply looking. "You don't have to," he began. "I know," she said. "I am choosing to." He went to the safe. She went with him. At 11:09, Sir Edmund Cray arrived, a forthright man in his late 60s who had the comfortable authority of someone who had been right about most things for long enough that he had stopped enjoying it and simply proceeded. "Mrs. Darvell met him at the door with the air of a woman who has been told what is happening and has made her own assessment of it and found it satisfactory. They waited in the small study, which was the room the Duke used for working rather than receiving, and which had the advantage of a fire and a strong morning light, and a table large enough to serve as a surface of record. Aldous Pell was summoned at 1:15. He came in with the ease of a man who has been summoned to great men's offices for years and has long since ceased to find it alarming. He was immaculate. As always, the fair hair in perfect order, the coat without a wrinkle, and his expression was one of pleasant professional attention. He registered Sir Edmund and Mrs. Darvell and Verity with 3 separate fractions of a look, each calibrated, each producing the appropriate degree of recognition. He registered Verity last, and for slightly longer than the others. "Your Grace," he said, with the warmth of a man who has had 4 years to calibrate the pitch of that greeting. Pell, the Duke, was standing by the window with his hands at his sides. He had not offered a seat. He indicated the chair on the far side of the table. "Please sit." Pell sat. He folded his hands on the table with the gesture of a man who is accustomed to taking notes and has no notes to take. "3 letters from the trustees," the Duke said, and set them on the table. Pell looked at them. A small thing happened in the corner of his left eye, a barely perceptible tightening, the kind of thing that passes for nothing in a face you are not watching closely and registers as very loud in a face you are. "Yes," Pell said. "I had been meaning to." "Mr. Pell?" said Sir Edmund. "Conversationally, can you tell us the content of the most recent of these, as you reported it to His Grace?" A pause. "I reported that the trustees were unavailable until the 14th, Pell said. His voice was the same as always, warm, measured, entirely reasonable. "And can you tell us," Sir Edmund continued, with the patience of a man who does not need to raise his voice, because time is on his side, what the letter itself says? Another pause. Shorter. The left eye again. "I believe there may have been some confusion," Pell began. "The letter says," Verity said, "that the trustees are available at any date of His Grace's choosing, including one a full week before the 14th. She set the letter in front of Sir Edmund, who read it with the unhurried thoroughness of a man for whom reading is a professional reflex. It further says that the information previously supplied about Lady Elspeth's condition has caused them considerable concern, and they ask whether His Grace wishes to send a physician's report in advance." She kept her voice even and clear and entirely pleasant. "What information did you supply them, Mr. Pell?" He was very still now. The warmth in his expression had not gone. That was the remarkable thing. She would think afterward, it did not leave so much as become visible as a construction, the way a painting becomes visible as paint when you step close enough. "I acted on the best information available to me," he said. "The best information available to you was Agnes," the Duke said from the window. And his voice was very quiet. "Who told me last week that Lady Elspeth had not eaten adequately in 2 days. Who is 17 years old and was terrified. You wrote to the trustees that Lady Elspeth was in decline." "I was trying to protect the house from." "From whom?" said the Duke. "From the trustees' impatience, or from the 14th? Another silence. This one had a different texture, the kind of silence in which a man who has spent years managing the information available to someone else suddenly becomes aware that the inventory is complete. "We will come to the letter," Sir Edmund said. Mildly, he produced his notes. "But first, Mr. Pell, are you acquainted with one Geoffrey Thorpe of Norfolk?" The warmth drained. It did not go quickly, but it went, the way a fire goes when the last piece of wood is spent, not sudden, but visible and final. "He is His Grace's brother," Pell said. "I know him in that capacity. Have you corresponded with him since March?" A long pause. The left hand on the table, which had been folded steadily, moved, one finger extended and retracted, a small self-correction, the habit of a man controlling something that wanted to move. She had been watching it all morning. She had catalogued it in the first week as a sign of suppressed impatience. She read it now, with the small clarity that comes after you have reread a letter you thought you understood and found it meant something else entirely, as the movement of a man who had once wanted something so badly that the wanting had become permanent muscle memory. "On estate business," he said. "On the terms of the late Duchess's trust," Sir Edmund said. It was not a question. Pell's hands went still. "There is one more matter," Verity said. She took the letter, the private one, the agreement between husband and wife, and held it face down on the table in front of Sir Edmund and looked at Pell. "I think," she said, "that you know what this is." He looked at the paper. Something moved through his face, not the warmth, which was gone, but something older than the warmth, something beneath the architecture of the man he had constructed, a grief she had not expected, real and disorganized and out of place in that immaculate face. "She was kind to me," he said, very quietly. "Eleanor, before," he stopped. "She waited, before," he said. "That is all. She was kind to me before." The room was very quiet. The light came through the window and lay on the table and the letter and Pell's still hands, and said nothing. "Then you will understand," Verity said, "why we will not be producing it." He looked at her. "It is not relevant," she said. "Lady Elspeth is demonstrably the daughter of this house, and will be presented to the trustees at a date of His Grace's choosing within the next fortnight, and she will be certified healthy, because she is. The letter says nothing about Elspeth. And Eleanor is dead." She kept her voice even. "There is no use to which this letter can be put that would not make the situation of the person using it considerably worse than it already is." Sir Edmund had made his notes. Mrs. Darvell stood beside the door with the expression of a woman who has borne witness to many things, and will bear witness to this without flinching, and will not speak of it indiscriminately, which was precisely why she had been asked. "Mr. Pell," the Duke said from the window. He had not moved. "You will write to my brother and tell him the matter is concluded. You will write to the trustees today, in your own name, correcting the information you supplied about my daughter's health. You will receive the salary owed to you through the end of August, and a reference for your competence," which was genuine, "and a request that you find a position in a different county." He paused. "You will leave Ashenmary today." Pell looked at him. Something in his face had settled, not peace, exactly, but the particular exhaustion that follows the end of something that has taken all of a person's energy to maintain. "The reference," he said. "The reference," the Duke confirmed. Pell stood. He looked at Verity for a moment with an expression that was not quite gratitude and not quite resentment, and was closest, she thought, to the expression of a man who knows he has been read correctly and cannot decide if that is a comfort or an indictment. He went out. The door closed behind him with a sound like a ledger being shut. Sir Edmund rose, shook the Duke's hand, said that he was glad to have been of service, and that he hoped to see Lady Elspeth in London with a clean bill of health, and went away. Mrs. Darvell followed him with the purposeful silence of a woman who has been useful and does not require to be thanked for it, though she would be, and thoroughly. The room was empty. The Duke stood by the window for a moment, not moving, and Verity stood by the table, and the letter lay face down between them, and the light moved on the floor. "She was kind to him," he said. "Yes," she said. "He needed her to stay," he said, "alive and present and attached to this house, and when she didn't, he stopped. It is possible to be culpable and also grieving." "Yes," she said. He turned from the window. He looked at her, that look, the one she had not named, and now she could name it. Because it was no longer calibrated or controlled or held at inventory distance. It was simply the look of a man who has seen a thing clearly and is not yet certain he has permission to say so. "I want to tell you something," he said. "And I need to say first that the stakes are settled. Elspeth is well. The trustees will be seen. The debts my father left me are being resolved by methods that have nothing to do with you, and will continue to be resolved whether you," he stopped. I am saying this badly. You are saying it very carefully, she said. Take your time. What I am trying to say, he said, is that I am not asking because I need something. I am asking because A pause. Because you knocked on a door 11 days ago when the sensible thing was to stay in your room, and you told me my daughter was cold, and you sat in my library and read with me, without requiring anything of me, and you looked at my house and found what was wrong with it, the same way you found what was wrong with Elspeth. Which was to say, you looked until you saw it, instead of until you had an explanation that was comfortable. He crossed the room. He stopped 2 feet from her. His hands were at his sides. I know that you have very little, and I know that I have a great deal, and I know that this creates an arithmetic that is not clean. I am asking you to set the arithmetic aside for a moment. I am asking you what you want. She looked up at him. He was very still, as he was always still, with the stillness of a man who had learned that quietness was a form of power and had forgot somewhere along the way that it was also a form of loneliness. You said, she told him, that you would hold me to telling me what you had not yet laid before me. I have, he said. You have, she agreed. She looked at his hands, those working hands, steady at his sides, and she thought about 11 days and 4 hours of screaming and a library at midnight, and the way a man sounds when he says goodnight at the wrong time of day. I want, she said, to be asked because you wish it. Not because the arithmetic works out. That is why I am asking. She looked at him for a moment longer, and she thought about the farm in Westmoreland and her father's careful records, and the plainer daughter who had made herself small enough not to bruise, and the cost of that and the years of it. Then yes, she said. Obviously yes. He exhaled, not visibly, but she felt it, the way you feel a change in air pressure. And then he did the thing she had been cataloging as a tracked milestone. He laughed. It was brief and quiet and absolutely genuine, and it changed his face entirely, the way a window changes when the shutter is lifted. Obviously, he repeated. I have been very patient, she said, about not saying it sooner. He reached out and took her hand, her practical, ink-stained sheep farm hand, in both of his working ones, and held it with the care of someone who has learned the difference between holding something too tightly and holding it as though it matters. Marry me, he said, because you wish it. It is the only reason I will take. She looked at their joined hands and thought about her father saying the difference between what a thing costs and what a thing is worth. And she thought that sometimes, very rarely, they were the same thing, and you had to be a person who had kept good records to recognize it. I have already said yes, she reminded him. I am confirming the terms, he said. The terms, she said, are satisfactory. They were married on the 3rd of October in the small chapel at the edge of the Eschenmere grounds, on a morning that smelled of turned earth and wood smoke and the particular cool green of autumn releasing. It was a quiet ceremony, which was appropriate. The house had had enough noise for one season. Agnes wept, which she would later deny. Mrs. Darvell wore her good black dress and stood in the back and permitted herself one expression of satisfaction that she did not share with anyone. Mrs. Patience Gillow, who had been observing all along and had merely declined to mention it, wore pale yellow and cried openly, and said it was the autumn air. Sir Edmund Cray sent a gift and a note that said he hoped he would not be needed at the house again in his official capacity, and that was the nearest anyone came to a joke at the reception, which was small and warm and went on longer than anyone planned. Geoffrey Thorpe did not write. He received Pell's letter, and his mortgage was not resolved, and that was the sum of what justice required. He had not, so far as could be determined, broken any law. He had merely been willing to benefit from what someone else was willing to do on his behalf. Whether he could distinguish between these things was his problem now, and not theirs. Aldous Pell took a position in Shropshire with a firm that did not require him to manage correspondence unsupervised. He was, the reference said, meticulous and intelligent and had excellent capacity for administration. All of this was true. The reference did not lie. It simply told the truth the way a man who had once told it selectively would recognize. Mrs. Gillow returned to Bath and wrote Verity letters of 3 pages length every fortnight, full of observations about the people she encountered, which Verity read with great attention and occasionally answered with the parts that required answering, and let the rest wash over her like a warm room. Elspeth Cavendish Thorpe was presented to the trustees on the 7th of August, 7 days early, in the full demonstration of her health that Agnes had coached her toward, and that she delivered with every indication of personal satisfaction. The trustees certified her. The trust was settled. The Duke's father's arithmetic was corrected by the new arithmetic, which was cleaner. There was a cook's cat throughout all of this, who maintained a position of principled indifference and was permitted to do so. She appeared once at the London certification, having somehow arranged passage, and was escorted home with the resigned respect she had always commanded. A year and some weeks after Verity had put her ear to the nursery door and heard a man at the end of his resources, she was in the library at midnight, reading a letter from her father's former solicitor about the farm in Westmoreland, which the solicitor had found, in the course of settling an old estate matter, had been left to Verity and her sister in a document her father had made in the last year of his life, and which had been, as her sister said, in the blunt direct line of a woman who had grown up on the same plain facts, misfiled, not lost, which was a distinction that had cost them 7 years, but was better than the alternative. The Duke came in from the corridor and found her in the chair they had both claimed as hers, with the letter in her hand and a particular expression on her face. He sat down in the other chair. He did not ask. He had learned, in a year, that she would tell him what mattered when she was ready, and that being ready happened faster when no one was waiting visibly. "My father left us the farm," she said. The solicitor found the deed. A silence. "Did you know there was a deed to find?" he said. "I thought there might be." The accounts were too careful for a man who expected to leave nothing. She set the letter down. "I read what is in front of me." He looked at her with the look that was no longer inventory, that had never gone back to being inventory once it had come through to the other side of itself. The fire was the same fire as last October and the year before that, and the rain was coming again, she could smell it, and on the floor below, Elspeth was doing whatever she was doing, which was rarely nothing and frequently informative. "She did not wake at 3 tonight," she said. "I know," he said. "She tried at 4. Agnes sang the counting song. "Agnes has learned it very well, she has," he agreed, "although her Westmoreland vowels are not quite right." She looked at the fire. "Nobody's are," she said, "except mine." He made that sound again, the brief, low, genuine one. The one she had stopped cataloging as a milestone because there were too many of them to count, and she had stopped wanting to count them. Outside, the rain came in, and the August night pressed warm against the library windows, and the fire was the fire, and they were in the same room they had been in when it all began, and everything in it was the same and entirely different. The way a line sounds different when you understand at last what it was telling you from the beginning. If this story settled something in your chest, if you have ever been the one who knocked anyway, who stayed quiet and kept good records and waited for the light, then you already know what Verity knew at the end of it, that the accounts do not always balance when we need them to, but they do, in the end, balance, and the settling is sweeter for the wait. Stay a little longer if you like. The fire is still lit, and the kettle is on, and there is always room in this chair for one more story. Tell me in the notes below, what was the moment you knew she had him? The library, or the nursery door, or something else altogether? Pull up the chair and subscribe if you'd like a place kept warm for you here. Sleep well tonight, and be good to the ones who read what is in front of them on your behalf.